Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Hi, thanks for tuning in to Legitimate on Phoenix Business RadioX. I'm your host, Rochelle Poulton, and I'm the owner and credit attorney at AZ Credit Law Group here in Tempe, bringing you the full perspective on issues that I handle every day, including the tricky but fascinating topic of identity theft. So for the next two Legitimate episodes, we are covering the world of credit reporting, and today's topic is identity theft. There is a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, with us, we've got three awesome guests giving us their legitimate perspectives. First up, we have Kenyatta Turner, adjunct professor, public speaker, business and behavioral coach and consultant, and LegalShield identity theft awesomeness expert, as well as Dioly Alexandre with Blackshields Cyber Incorporated, defending businesses from hackers, and Detective Eckert with the Goodyear Police Department and the Property Crimes Fraud Division, and he is a crisis negotiator. So Kenyatta, why don't you tell us more about yourself, your many businesses, and why you offer LegalShield's identity theft protection plan?
Thank you, Rochelle, and I appreciate being here. So thanks for having me. And so I am a LegalShield business solutions specialist. So I basically help business owners protect their companies and their employees and their family with legal services and identity theft protection. Like you mentioned, I also teach at a college, and I'm a behavioral coach.
Awesome. So why do you do the identity theft LegalShield protection?
I believe everyone deserves access to protect themselves. And we live in a crazy topsy-turvy world where people don't always treat people fairly. They don't always do the right thing. And oftentimes we need to be able to defend ourselves, specifically when it comes to identity theft protection. We all are going to be victims if we're not already. And the services I provide really help mitigate some of that risk.
I love it. All right, Dioly with Blackshields Cyber, defending businesses from hackers. Tell us, what do you do, what your role is, and how you protect people's confidential information?
Sure. So I'm the CEO and chairman of the company. We're a cyber warfare company. We work with a lot of critical industries. So that's a lot of banks, medical institutions, logistics, transportation, energy companies. Pretty much we work with the entities that make the world go round. And what we're often doing with clients is we're coming in and we're providing them full cyber warfare capabilities. So we're not just saying we're going to give you a software or a piece of technology or a piece of hardware, but we're giving them the people, the infrastructure, and all the tools they need to actually stay protected. And our people are protecting them. We use the term cyber warfare because not only will we notify the client, but we will actively defend them, and we can counterattack if need be to help protect them from cyber attacks, which happen pretty often.
It's a terrifying answer. Well, Detective Eckert, please tell us about what you do and why.
Like you mentioned, my name is Detective Eckert. Been an officer 16 years, so I've been specifically 4 years doing property crimes, which has entailed obviously fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and pretty much anything related.
Wow. Tough job. So thank you all for letting me know what you all do. So moving on to the topic of identity theft. First off, what is identity theft? Is it more of a you know it when you see it, or would you say it has a more specific definition? Kenyatta, let's start with you.
Sure. Identity theft is basically the use of someone's information for what I call dastardly deeds. Probably the things that he's working with over here with Officer Eckert. If someone's information is compromised, meaning it's obtained where it shouldn't be, it got through Dioly's team somehow, and people got it.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. But if that ever were to happen, then the actual acquisition of the information isn't identity theft. It's when they actually go to start using it for things that they shouldn't be, maybe buying and selling it on the dark web, or opening up accounts in people's names, or there's a whole list. So
yes.
To me, that's kind of what identity theft is.
So it's everything that isn't you.
Yes, if you didn't do it or allow it to happen, yes.
Oh, would you agree, or do you have anything to elaborate on that answer, Dioly?
I'm gonna elaborate a little bit because I think that the definition of identity theft has gotten a little bit more hazy because, quite frankly, the average person has no idea where their identity actually is.
Yep.
And what it's actually being used for. Really good example. A good buddy of mine knows an NFL cheerleader, and she's a model, and so her Instagram is her life. Instagram used her pictures on some of their marketing material. And she obviously didn't consent to that. But within the Instagram's terms of user agreement, it actually says two things which are contradictory. On one level, it says whatever you create is yours. On the other level, it says that by being on their platform, whatever is yours is also theirs. So it's part of that. But identity theft, I mean, it's taking people's information, which people have more information, and using it for your purposes without necessarily having their permission to do so. Maybe it's for profit, like Instagram does, and maybe it's for dastardly deeds, like buying a boat in the Bahamas off of their credit score. Who knows? But I think the definition has gotten a little bit more hazy over the years.
What about you, Detective? How would you define identity theft?
Well, I would say I always resort back to like Title 13, so I'm going to go by with the law. Obviously, I brought it 13-2008, taking identity of another. And do you want me to read the statute?
Sure.
Just to read it outright. So that would say a person commits taking the identity of another person or entity if the person knowingly takes, purchases, manufactures, records, possesses, or uses any personal identifying information or entity identifying information of another person or an entity, including real or fictitious, without the consent of that person or entity, with the intent to obtain or use the other person's identity for any unlawful purpose or to cause loss to a person or entity, whether or not the person or entity actually suffered any economic loss as a result of the offense, with the intent to obtain or continue employment.
Who writes this stuff? That's what I want to know. Like, sit down.
I would say lawyers.
If lawyers wrote it, it would be more brief.
But yeah, and I mean, for me, that's what we always resort back to.
Yeah.
That's the cop in me. When we're going to charge somebody, that's what we're going to look at. That's what we have to prove in court. So that would be
your definition.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
All
That's
that.
very legit.
Yeah.
It's a little more definitive than dastardly deeds.
Yes.
That's
You
what I
know,
like
in
it.
our office, we kind of consider it when someone steals your name or your driver's license number, your social security number, your medical information. There's a lot of medical, like billing fraud that happens in Arizona. Student loan fraud happens quite a bit too. So you can end up having student loans taken out in your name and you haven't graduated from high school yet.
Yep.
So there's a lot of identity theft that kind of goes out there. It's
Mhm.
a pretty broad topic, but I do think that all of your examples are definitely it.
Mhm.
So let's talk lingo. So what are the most common terms that you hear, and tell our listeners what the heck they mean? Let's start with you, Dioly.
In identity theft or in I guess security information in general.
Both.
Oh,
Like,
there's
what is a
so
hacker?
much. A hacker. Okay, I actually have a personal vendetta about this because I consider myself a hacker. So, if we really want to be proper here,
Like a white hat hacker?
yeah, if we want to be politically correct, the term hacker is actually used completely wrong in mainstream media. Most of the time, the term hacker is used to talk about a criminal, to talk about somebody who is committing a crime or is breaking into systems unlawfully. But the original definition of the term hacker was actually not that at all. It was actually to talk about the good guys. In fact, by definition, hacker just means somebody who tinkers with stuff. The original hackers were actually just tinkering with like model railroad models and stuff like that. So they tinker with the railroad directions and tracks and change the directions and stuff like that. It wasn't until mainstream media, more Hollywood, kind of put the term hacker on it that it kind of stuck to really more mean the bad guys. The real term of a criminal hacker is actually called a cracker. So that's somebody who actually commits crimes using their skills. I was actually in LA a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about this vendetta because it's something personal to me, because I hold the term hacker very dearly because it's part of who I am. And somebody said, well, shouldn't we put a term on it? And I said, no, you should just call them criminals, because we don't call Bernie Madoff an unethical accountant. He was just a criminal. He just happened to use accounting as his mode of crime, right? We don't call a drug dealer, a black hat pharmacist. They're just a drug dealer. So I'm trying to kind of change that stigma around hacker. It's not a criminal. A hacker is a skill, but committing a crime is committing a crime.
I like it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So who came up with cracker? Is that like
That was
criminal
original.
hacker? Is that what that, is that where that came from?
Maybe, I don't know. So originally the term was hacker and cracker, and it was distinction. I think I'm pretty, and this is like the 1970s, 80s when these two terms kind of were
Less
created.
politically correct.
I would imagine that the reason why cracker went out of phase and hacker stuck is because the term cracker also means something else that most people probably don't want to say too much. So then the term hacker just stuck, and it sounds cooler to say hacker. So it just stuck. And again, mainstream Hollywood did it because the first couple movies like The Matrix and these, the super techie hacker movies of people just smashing away at a keyboard and then being like, I'm in the firewall, as a hacker. So it just kind of stuck.
I don't think people know what those things mean sometimes.
No, usually they don't.
So, Detective, what do you hear most common?
I don't really know if I hear the lingo like they're hearing. Obviously, more like I do agree with him, more like a criminal. To me, it's breaking the law. Obviously that's the cop in me. Still, there's the line. So I would say, but I don't know if I really hear any terminology.
Awesome. What about you, Kenyatta?
Well, we hear hacking all the time. We hear that. And from the realm that we discuss it is, I guess, the act of the most common form of identity theft or a data breach, I guess, is through hacking.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we kind of use that language, like the act of breaking into a system and taking information that doesn't belong to you. Obviously, we hear data breach all the time. A lot of my clients will be hearing about it because it's always happening, probably happening somewhere right now. And skimmers is another one when it comes to, people being able to walk by you and take information off your credit card with devices. And so, RFID blockers. So we hear that term as well to protect from skimming. And then ransomware, which is very interesting, which I believe, and someone please correct me, which is the idea of stealing data that's not yours and then holding it for ransom until someone pays for it, and then you'll give it back. Or give something back.
So I can steal your personal information, and then I can put a ransom on it. I can say, hey, you're going to pay me $5,000 to get this information back, and then when you pay me $5,000, I give it back to you. Now, if you do give it back to me, then I'm definitely going to come back next year and do it again. So that's the problem behind ransomware. Ransomware went rampant the past couple years because in 2016, I think, some genius from the FBI told people that the best thing to do was pay it, which is kind of like telling the public that if they get robbed, the best thing to do is just to give your purse off. So I'm sure that motivates robbers. They now are retracting on that, saying you shouldn't pay it because there's no guarantee that you're going to get your ransomware back. But this is, I guess, to speak a little bit to the morality of most criminal hackers. I think 80% of them will give you your information back if you pay for it. So you go ahead and weigh that out.
Pareto principle.
Cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Super rude. So, who do you think is most at risk for identity theft in your experience, Detective?
There's going to be a bunch of different groups. Obviously, here in Arizona, we see a lot of seniors. So I'd say seniors are there. I'm also seeing a lot on the young social media kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot of Instagram scams, things like that, like get rich quick. Seeing that's blown up.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sarah's discovery.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a lot now where these kids are just out of high school. They're seeing a post, and it's usually from somebody they knew from high school, some popular person, football player, and they got it from someone else like, hey, hit me up. You got a bank account, and hit me up. We can make some money. And typically they agree and meet them, whether it's at like a Circle K. They give up their debit card and their PIN, and they're convinced that, hey, what's going to happen is just let me have your bank account for a couple of weeks. I'm going to leave some money in it for you. It's going to be kind of get rich quick. And
that
these
works.
kids, most kids are struggling, whether they're in college or not. The downside is most of these bank accounts are attached to mom and dad. So usually these fake checks get deposited immediately and then the suspects start withdrawing money. And then by the time all those checks bounce, you're usually about 10 grand or more in the hole. And then mom and dad are stuck footing the bill. Because usually the kids are 18 to 20 years old, I would say would be the target age, and they're still on mom and dad's bank account. So sadly, I've had a bunch of those. Like last year, I want to say 2018 was kind of a big year for that. So knock on wood, it's died down this year, which is a good thing. But
wow,
yeah,
not ideal.
Yeah.
What about you, Dioly?
So I can speak on it from a business perspective. We're seeing, so one of the terms that we hear a lot is phishing, which is sending emails or some type of communication to someone to try to get them to do something. And we're seeing a lot more sophisticated targeting of those types of attacks towards our businesses. It used to be that criminals just throw out a bunch of stuff and just kind of see what sticks to the wall. We're actually seeing now where it's much more targeted and much more personalized. For example, me and the detective were having a conversation before we got on here where I was telling him that one of the business owners that is our client, he's a big car guy, and he has a couple old like Mustang Shelby cars. And if you went on his Instagram, if you went on his Facebook, you would know that, right? But because it's all over his social media. And he got an email saying, or from Ford, from Ford Classical Car Division, that his car's VIN number is special, and they're gonna come out here to Arizona and bring all the people who own these older Shelbys together. And if anyone who knows about cars knows, if you own something like a Shelby, it's like a little club, and they want to invite him out, right? And so no big deal. And so he was super excited. Yes, of course. But he happened to tell me about it because we were in conversation in a meeting, because I'm a car guy too. And I said, I've never heard about that. Let me see that email string. And we started tracing it back, and the emails were coming out of India and South Africa. That's where the IP addresses were coming out of. And I said, well, you know what? Now that we're aware of it, go ahead and follow this rabbit hole down and see where it goes. And lo and behold, eventually, right before the date was to confirm his attendance, they said, oh, by the way, we need to make sure that you have insurance. And so can you confirm your bank and routing information for us? So that way we can add that to our insurance policy, so that if anything were to go wrong, we would take out a deposit of like $1,000 or something like that, which again, for someone like him, that's not a big deal. And he would have said, okay, sure. But now they would have had his bank account information. They at least would have had $1,000. And in fact, they might have had the opportunity to take more money out. So they're much more targeted now, is what I'm noticing. They're much more targeted towards business owners and business leaders.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Well, that's not...
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it is social media, right? I mean, we put so much on social media, it's... People don't realize how much they put on social media. Like I sit on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and I see people like, oh, I'm going to go eat at this restaurant with my family, and I'm going to go here, and I just bought this, and I just did that. And I can borderline trace your life, for several years, and say, okay, you and your family like to eat here, or you like to buy this, or you're into that. I mean, it's kind of given.
Your whole life footprint online.
Yeah. And that's enough to make, decisions probably about how people make their passwords and all that stuff as well, because it's everything they need to figure it out if they've got the time. And apparently they have the time.
Yeah.
It's their job.
Yeah.
And I would say even in my line of work, almost that same opposite works. When I look at the older, being in Arizona, we have an older community. We have a lot of retirement communities. Now you're talking about a generation that grew up on trust. A lot of them, their family fought like World War II. So a lot of these people take everything at face value, and it's almost the opposite. They're not, I'm seeing, at least from my victims, I'm seeing them not go online and taking people face value. I've even talked to people that have lost $20,000, and they're like, well, he sounded like a nice guy. He had a Christian name. And I'm like, that's where they're hitting on morals. A lot of these, and they're not Googling it. They're not double checking addresses and things like that. They're taking people's word for it and becoming victimized.
I would agree with that as well. With a lot of my clients, and initially I would say that a lot of elderly individuals typically can be victimized from the same reasons you're talking about. And I think the stat, I can't remember where I saw this or heard this, but like 1 out of 11 children under the age of 18 are already victims, and their parents have no idea. And how they're getting that information is all the different ways that we're talking about that they're getting it. But if you imagine a child, 6-year-olds not checking their credit report or anything like that, but they have a name, they have a social, they have a birth date, and I would assume that the thieves wouldn't be using their birth date because that wouldn't help them, but they would just attach someone else's birthday to it and someone else's address and someone else's information and create a whole brand new person and go out there. So I hear stories all the time of 2-year-olds already filing for bankruptcy, or, a 12-year-old who, already has, utility debt, or, owns a boat. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it's parents who's using their children's information, oftentimes. And that's also unfortunate as well. So in this day and age, it really seems to me that everyone could be affected. I mean, it's a broad stroke, but, with companies, losing their information because they don't use Dioly service, the information is out there all over the place. And I just don't think that any of us are safe at this point.
Well, so my identity was actually stolen when I was about 10 years old. And I didn't find out until I was 18 when I went to actually make my first credit card. I went to Best Buy and I wanted to make a credit card because I wanted to get a new computer. And they were like, you already have a credit card. It's been on for like 5 years. And yeah, now I will tell you that the worst person to hack is a hacker. So I had a field day with that. But, you know, as I talked about earlier, people's information is in more places than ever before. And that's part of the problem. So, and Detective, you might be able to speak on this as well. But what we're also starting to see is that people's identities aren't stolen directly as much as maybe a company had a failure and they dumped a bunch of data and your number just happened to be in it. And if you look at things like Equifax and Target and Macy's and Sony and you know, all those different things, and the way that this data is sold on the dark web, by the way, is on packages. Like you can go on the dark web and say, I want to buy a package of 1,000 random names and 1,000 random addresses and 1,000 random credit card numbers, and it's $100 each. And maybe it's on sale for $95.99, right? And it all just kind of comes together. So, but you don't know that, right? You didn't consciously do something stupid to get your identity stolen, and instead you went to a grocery store, you went to the doctor, you went to wherever, and that place got breached, and your data was just part of it. So I think part of it is people should probably take a little bit more scrutiny as to where their data's going.
And credit monitoring.
Yeah, because it's out there.
A lot of things. So, you know, how would you say that identity theft impacts a person's life? How would you?
Oh, man, I have a list. I do. Well, I think that first, there's many ways, excuse me, that identity theft manifests. And it's everything from credit fraud and tax fraud, medical fraud, minor identity theft fraud, criminal character fraud. And so, and most people think that it's credit fraud and financial fraud that's the biggest form of identity theft, and it is not. It's actually medical fraud. And medical companies and businesses lose more data than anything else. So because it manifests in so many different ways, it can affect you in a lot of different ways. And I think and we also find in my business with LegalShield that 70% of identity theft issues incur a legal issue. And that alone causes issues because now you need attorneys. And attorneys can be costly if you don't have friends like I do, who are attorneys. However, I think that when these things happen, there's a feeling of violation, there's frustration, there's anger, which causes stress, which causes health issues, which causes the inability to stay focused. It causes absenteeism at work or school. It causes presenteeism. When you are at work and school and you're distracted because you're trying to think about these things that have happened, I think it can cause family strife and embarrassment. It can cause, if someone in the family blames the person in the family because they did put something crazy, TMI, on social media, and they feel like that's where the information was stolen from. I mean, I just think it causes a lot of emotional trauma having to deal with something like this. Not only is it may affect your bank account, but it may affect other things because now you've got to go through the process, whatever that process is, however long it takes and whatever it's going to cost to fix it. When you could be sitting under a tree enjoying the sunshine, but now you're on the phone for hours dealing with some company to try to fix something that you don't even know where to begin. So I think that's how it can affect someone, not just in their bank account or pocketbook, which I think is where most people tend to think of it. I think it's much bigger and broader than that. And it's your reputation. It's the ability to apply for a loan. It's your background check. If you're a teacher and let's say someone is using your address in a sex offender database and it comes up there's so many different things I think that unfortunately people don't really realize how deep it can go if your information is being misused. And it just a whole list of things.
I mean, I can give you a real world application. All of our cyber warfare employees go through a background check that's about similar to what the government does for secret clearance. So if your identity gets stolen and your information is in places that is a high risk, that could cost you a job with us because, if you got a boat in the Bahamas or you are on a sex offender list and stuff like that, I mean, that's not you, but that's what comes up and you get passed up. So, and more jobs, more companies are starting to do background checks into credit and into financial history and personal history. So, yeah, I don't know what from a legal standpoint that would look like, but I know from a business standpoint, I mean, it could cost you a job.
Yeah, when we deal with identity theft in my office, it's always the person is stressed out, usually not quite sure what happened or how it happened or how long it's been going on. So you usually just kind of have to calm them down and let them know there's hope. There's always a way to fix it. Just, hang in there. Let's start at the beginning with, let's look at your credit. Let's look at your bank. Let's check your tax returns. It gets pretty broad, pretty fast. But yeah, I would say stress is definitely one of the biggest factors that isn't money, but
No, and I agree with you. It's a big deal, and like what you're saying, it's a lot. I see stress, and it can even affect other family members, especially when you have like victims that are elderly. It's their kids trying to pick up the pieces and do different things like that. But in addition, you have to think about too that the problem that I see from a lot of people is, especially with like a ID theft affidavit or a packet. These people lose their information. They're like, okay, fill out this form, put all your personal information on these 3 pages and fax it to us. And they're like, yeah. And I could tell you, most people are like, you know what? I don't know what happened. I don't know what of my identity was taken. But the last thing I want to do is fill this out and send this to pawn first creditors to try to get rid of some title loan that somebody did or some loan that someone did. And they're like, yeah, I'm not putting my personal information because I don't trust anybody now. So then that's the struggle I see, at least for me, when they're like, what do I do? And then I'm going to refer them over to you guys and say, let's go talk to them.
Thank you.
So story time. Tell us a story about identity theft that left an impression. Hypothetically, please. No names, no real details.
I just heard one the other day that was pretty devastating. It was a situation where a woman had the police show up at her house and to let her know that her mother had done a lot of dastardly deeds in her name. And the daughter had to make a decision to testify against her mother, which ultimately put her mother in jail for 7 years because of this. And her mother had been using her information for years and years and years. And she just really told the story of how devastating that decision that was to make, because otherwise she had to take the responsibility on her own. And they literally told her, either you say this was you or your mom's going to jail. And she said, sorry, Mom. But how horrible is that? There's just one. I just heard it 2 days ago, and she told it from stage. She told this story, and it was a devastating story. You could just tell how traumatized, she was having to deal with something like that. And that was pretty sad. And then other stories that I hear here are really to do with children, not necessarily from their parents, but from wherever the thieves are getting the information. It seems like, you're born, you get a social, and then the social's probably already stolen, sitting in some database somewhere, waiting to be attached to, a name. And as soon as it is, it's like, oh, okay, now we have a fake person. So I hear a lot of stories like that actually quite often that are pretty devastating. And then my credit card was stolen. Someone was buying gas in Florida when I was not in Florida. That was several years ago. And I was like, get out of here. This is before I had the services I have now. And I was traumatized over that because my credit card was in my wallet. So I don't even understand how it happened. And there was nothing that the police were able to do at that time. I called them and they said, well, we don't know who did it. So just call your bank. And, that was it. And that was, those kind of things are traumatizing. So those are just a couple of stories that come to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add on what she's saying here is there's definitely, I see the same thing, family. And the problem is in my line of work, when I see a true identity theft, and I don't want to say, online people can grab dates of birth, you can get your social grabbed. Probably the most common I would say is credit card information. Now, technically by statute, that's your personal information, but I don't really believe that a 16-digit number with an expiration date but it is attached to my bank account. So it could have ramifications, but nowadays you can usually cut that off and it's done. But like she was saying, when you have a true, full identity taken, when I see it, it is typically grandma allowed granddaughter, grandson into the house who had a drug problem. They had access to all their tax forms, knew their maiden names, all that stuff. So they just had such a wealth of information. So it is very personal. Typically, when I find out, they always know who it is. It's a roommate they helped out. It's a family member. It's somebody they know. So you're right. You have to go to court. You have to testify against them. For someone that's going to do, in my opinion, the most damage and really go out there with your identity, but we see all the time, credit cards just taken and things like that. And it is traumatizing, but it's nice that in most cases, the banks kind of step up. They take it as a loss. Usually after some negotiating, you get your money back, you get a new credit card, you kind of move on with life, and people kind of forget.
Yeah.
But it can still have, it can still be damaging as well. But the family aspect's definitely personal. That's a
When
struggle
it's
for
someone
most
you
people.
know.
Yeah.
Right.
So this one's a little bit different, and I love this story because I tell this one every time I go to cybersecurity conferences. There was a guy up in New York who was doing credit card skimming. So first off, if anyone has never been to New York during rush hour, it's shoulder to shoulder pretty much on subways and trams and stuff like that. And this guy got there's this tiny computer system called a Raspberry Pi, and it's a tiny little computer about the size of a Game Boy, and you can put different programs and stuff like that on it. And he put a program and some antennas for skimming credit cards. First off, the whole chip thing that banks pushed out and said that this is like the new level of security and this is the standard, that was the best thing that ever happened to criminals, because that chip is literally radiating your information out. Literally, it's radiating RFID your information. So
I'm like, what?
Yeah, but yeah, it's secure. Don't worry. So this guy was pretty much
sarcasm?
I think
well, so this guy got a Raspberry Pi and he put some skimming software on it and had some antennas and stuff like that. And he was pretty much walking through the subways of New York, just bumping into people and skimming their credit cards. He would get, no one really knows how many he got, but when he was caught, he had already collected 10,000 credit card numbers. So pretty much what he was doing was he'd go out, he'd get a batch, he'd probably do it for a week or so, package that batch up, and then go sell it on the dark web. And that batch could be broken down. And again, it's just like drugs, right? Sell it wholesale, break it down, and then split it up. Not that I know the process, but you know. So the only reason why he was caught, and this is the funny part for me, the only reason why he was caught was because one of the credit cards that he skimmed happened to be an FBI special agent's credit card. And so when he went on the dark web and sold it, obviously, as an FBI special agent, your stuff is monitored all over the place. FBI flagged it. They said, what is your credit card doing on the dark web? They ended up finding it in a package of other credit cards, and they ended up tracking it back and catching him. But if he hadn't happened to scan an FBI credit card number, he would have been doing it. No one knows how much he had already done it.
Jerk.
Right. And I have two other really, really quick stories I'm going to share because they're different than even those. One was I saw it on the news, and it was an elderly woman who had the police show up at her house because there had been a car accident in which someone had been killed. And the driver's license that was given, or they found, had her information on it. And so that's why they showed up at her house. So she had to ultimately go through the process of proving that it wasn't her and she wasn't there. And the only way she was able to prove that is because she was in the hospital at the time getting a surgery, getting a procedure. But before it even got to the point of her being able to do that, in her words, she had to spend thousands of dollars and countless hours going through the process to try to prove that it wasn't her in that accident at that time that it caused that accident. And she's just this little old lady and, telling this story, and she can see how emotional she was about that. And she goes, my driver's license was in my purse. I don't know how. Right. And so that's just one other example. And then the other one is tax fraud. I mean, I don't even know all the exact numbers, but I think it was a couple years ago that the IRS had admitted that they had paid out like $26 billion in fraudulent tax returns.
Our government's so good.
That number is insane. So to know that, and I also heard them say that the best way to avoid that is just to file your taxes before the thieves do.
File early
to try to do it before someone does it for you.
Yeah, that is single-handedly the best advice on preventing tax fraud.
That's
File
the weird
on time.
caveat around, but that's the weird caveat around identity theft is that when your identity gets stolen, you're trying to prove that you aren't you.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so when my identity got stolen and I finally found out and I was trying to go through and fix it, I had addresses in Texas. And it's like, I'm talking to them and they're like, well, how do we know that wasn't you? And it's like, well, it wasn't, but how, you know what I mean? Like, how do I prove that I'm not me? You know what I mean? So that's the hard, that's the hard caveat, right? I ultimately ended up paying off like a portion of it and just saying, you know what, it was small enough that I'm like, I'm just going to do this. I was starting the company at the time. So I'm like, I need to get this out of the way. But that was the biggest caveat. I got to a point on the phone where I was literally like, so I was asking the gal at the collections agency, I go, so how do I prove to you that it wasn't me who did something that you are saying that I already did under my information? How does that work?
We use the term "we were guilty until proven innocent."
Yeah.
It's pretty complicated. We deal with a wide variety of identity theft issues, starting from student loans to vehicles, multiple vehicles being sold to one person from the same dealership in the same day. Yeah, they didn't do it. So, it gets pretty complicated pretty quick. So the key is do something sooner rather than later. People, when they try to do it on their own, they usually don't start with the police, and that's usually the best place to start. But let's talk about stuff that's happening in the world of credit. Kenyatta, how would you classify the difference between a credit freeze and a credit lock?
Well, a credit lock is easier to unlock than a freeze. To thaw a freeze, I guess. I guess I'll put somewhere that way. Because a credit lock, typically it's pretty easy for you to lock and unlock your credit. Like you can unlock it to allow someone to run your credit. Let's say if you're trying to buy a car, you can do that from an app on your phone or something like that. A freeze is a little more involved, and it kind of freezes everything, and it's harder to unlock it. And I think there's some legalities that are involved around a freeze as well that aren't involved with a lock. And sometimes companies charge you to do a freeze, like Equifax and things like that, which I don't think they should be charging for that.
They currently don't, in light of the data breach.
Oh, well,
but
yeah, they can't anymore.
Yeah, with the credit lock, you can do it from an app. Pick one of the credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. Yeah. They've got an app, and you can lock and unlock with a swipe on your phone. Whereas with the credit freeze, it's going to freeze it across all three bureaus, and you're not applying for credit until you unfreeze. And sometimes they charge you to unfreeze. So freezing and unfreezing isn't great. But I would say if you have a kid or a minor, freeze their freaking credit and renew that stuff. Because now their stuff won't they won't be victims of identity theft, at least on the credit side. Banking is a whole separate issue, and so is medical debt. So anything to add? Credit freeze, credit lock, any suggestions from you two?
I don't really deal with that. So
yeah, you're on the enforcement side.
Yeah, I'm not fully knowledgeable on how.
Because you're the business side.
Well, I know Equifax sucks. I know that.
Just throwing it out there.
Well, look, Equifax, the breach of Equifax was a blatant example of how companies got so much information. I mean, it's one thing if you're a hospital or if you're a bank. It's another thing if you're something like Equifax, where your literal job is to hold people's private information that, by the way, no one ever actually agrees to. Like, there's never actually a point where we say, okay, I'm okay with Equifax having this information. They kind of just have it. And maybe it's one of those necessary evils that's arguable. But I think if you're going to be a company, and one of three, by the way, because there's virtually no competition. I think if you're going to do that, yeah, you got a lot more responsibility than that. And we know, our company knows personally what happened at Equifax. And that's, I think, what makes me even more frustrated. Because if you know some of the in-depth details of what actually happened at Equifax, it would make you pretty angry.
Are you going to tell us?
Do you want me to?
Can you?
Basically, what happened at Equifax. So what happened at Equifax is that you had security on infrastructure and servers and systems and stuff like that. And the manufacturers of these servers and systems, they'll find a vulnerability in them. And then they'll put out what's called a patch. So they'll put out a patch that updates that security. And now it's not vulnerable to that thing anymore. Think of it like getting a vaccine. Every time a new vaccine comes out, you should go get it. So you're not vulnerable to like smallpox, right? Well, when you're a company as big as Equifax, doing things like patching takes time. A system might be down, a system might be interrupted, it might have to be limited in its production as it's updating or doing whatever it needs to do. And that's not concerning if it fails, because sometimes a patch will come out, you update it, and then the patch did something else to something else, and your systems stop working now, and you got to go reconfigure stuff. And so a company as big as Equifax, their money moves by the seconds. So being down for an hour is a tangible cost. Having a network down for a couple of days is a very tangible cost. Well, pretty much what happened was that a patch came out, and the manufacturer said, you need to update your servers, you're going to be vulnerable to this. And when companies that big get it, what they do sometimes is they weigh out how, and this is the really annoying part because you're the victim here. They weigh out how much would it be to have the downtime of patching versus how much could it cost if we get breached as a result of that patch? And somewhere along the line, Equifax decided, you know what? The cost of potentially getting breached is lower than the cost of potentially having a failure as a result of that patch. Or it's just not enough that we need to do it right now. We can wait. So they decided to wait and keep waiting and keep waiting. And then the breach happened. And then they decided, okay, well, the worst case scenario is that we're going to get sued. Well, what's the cost of going full force into this breach versus the cost of just letting it run out and it come out and we don't have to worry about it? And the cost of that was lower. Now, remember, to them, they just look at numbers. To them, it's 100 billion versus 125 billion, right? To you, it's your identity.
Mm-hmm.
So they literally decided your identity is not worth enough for us to actually protect it in this instance. So we're going to hold off on it. And then, now you have what happened. And they actually, believe it or not, as much as it cost them, because it did cost them a lot of money, as much as it cost them,
It was still
it
cheaper.
did not cost them as much as it would have cost them to do the right thing.
So they probably feel they got a deal.
Pretty much. It was, so for example, they got breached. And then at first, they said, everyone is entitled to a class action lawsuit, which was great, right? But that's literally what a third of the country was eligible.
And
for
it
a
was
class
really
action lawsuit.
everybody, let's be real.
Yeah, realistically. So pretty much, look, let's just be conservative. A third of the country was eligible to sue Equifax. Well, then they put up that page, to check if your credit was breached, which seems fair, right? Except in fine print, it says if you use that, you're voiding your ability to class action lawsuit.
You waive everything.
So they're saying, hey, you can check to see if we screwed up, but by checking to see if we screwed up, you can't hold us accountable for screwing up. So they did that for a while. Eventually, the government actually came down and said, look, you do have to pay something. Mm-hmm. And then they got the settlement of billions and billions of dollars, which sounds really great until everyone realized that so many people got breached that billions and billions of dollars literally amounted to everyone getting like $120 or $150 or something like that.
That's before taxes.
Right. Yeah. So congratulations. Your identity may be lost. You may have literally screwed, and you know this, may have literally screwed up your credit for the next 15, 20 years, rest of your life maybe. But it's cool because you got $120. So that was next step, okay? So to me, I thought that was a slap in the face. So that's what you're telling me I'm worth, $120. Great. Then they realized that too many people were actually going for the $120. Okay. So then they said, well, we're going to make, like 5 years or a lifetime of credit monitoring.
Which is again, already free.
It's stupid. Why would I let you monitor my credit if you just got breached?
That's not who you want monitoring your credit.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like if somebody kicked your door in and robbed your house, and then they were like, okay, look, fine, let's make a deal. I'll protect your house from now on. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense. So then they did that for a while, and so they kind of moved people away from getting the 125. But then they just came out and said, hey, look, we literally just don't have the money to pay out everybody. So
try again.
My bad.
Sorry.
And that's it. And that's how it all ended. They were able to walk away. So you got to understand that a company like Equifax, they already predetermined that from the day that they discovered that breach. They already knew we're going to spend this much on lawyers. We're going to spend this much on a settlement where it's going to last us this long. We're back to running now. So maybe a couple people.
Equifax sucks.
Yeah, so Equifax sucks. I mean, it's a blatant example of users not having really very little control over their data.
Yeah, no control.
And a company was actually big enough to say, yeah, we don't really give a crap.
That's insane. So,
are you pissed off?
Yes, I am. I am seething with rage, actually. We dealt with a lot of people who are always victims of identity theft. That's just what you see in consumer rights. That's just like one of the big tier items that people come to with credit problems is mixed file issue where someone else's information is on your credit report or someone had their information stolen, usually by a family member, and they've got to deal with that for years. And so they always want to get the police involved, and I think they need to. I think they should always file a police report because that's step one of proving it wasn't you. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, the FTC released the identitytheft.gov website to walk people through fixing their identity theft problems. I've been on the website, but I'll reserve my comments and let Kenyatta, who's chuckling over here, tell me her thoughts on that website.
Well, I think it's adorable
Yes.
that
It's adorable.
there is this. Oh, and you have it. So yeah, it's so
I got that for
cute.
you. Just
We got the
Thank you so
printout.
much. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
It's
Well
beautiful.
prepared.
I love the color scheme. It's wonderful.
Very
And-
soothing.
And and what it does is better than nothing. And that's what I'll say. But now the person has to take the time they don't have to go through these steps, which is very lengthy, time consuming, and time is money. And it's confusing to try to resolve something like this. So this works if you don't have someone to do it for you. But most people don't want to do this, don't have the time to do this, and will not do this because it will frustrate them, even though it's designed to help them and it's better than nothing. So I'm glad for that because we need something. So when I look at this, I think, I'm sure glad I have ID Shield because they will do all that for me. So that's exactly what I think of that. You have two choices. Either you do it yourself or you have someone else do it or you do nothing. And I guess that is actually a choice.
Yeah,
That's a terrible choice.
I was talking to Kenyatta about that, and I mean, she actually pointed out to me that the statistical probability of one of my employees getting their identity stolen, because we're now reaching a number of employees where that statistical viability is becoming very real, right? It's real enough that we're going to see it. And she outlined to me how much time it takes people and how it can take time away from work and how, again, we could lose people because of that. Because if we go to a bank, if we go to a hospital, if we go to an energy facility and we say, okay, this is the people that's going to serve you, but those people are getting breached themselves, that doesn't work for the product that we're providing. So she literally outlined that to me, and she told me the price of what LegalShield will cost for my employees. And I went back to my CFO and I said, hey, look, the cost of just giving all of this to our employees, like as just an employee perk, that's no charge to them, is less than the cost of what will happen if one of them actually gets their identity stolen. Mm-hmm. So let's just go ahead and do it.
Makes sense.
Best boss ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our city just within the last couple of years included it as well as one of the benefits. So that's nice having a city that's okay, we'll include this benefit that you can sign up for and be protected. So
yeah,
that's nice. Yeah,
I agree. I think that LegalShield's ID Shield is hands down the best product on the market for preventative care. I'm a big fan, and I do consumer rights. Like I actually fix the problems after they happen because they didn't have someone like LegalShield beforehand. Right, yeah. So big plug in case you missed it. So identity theft rings is, something that I see a lot in the news. And do you have anything to say about that, Detective?
Me? I mean, I think it's never going to go away. I mean, realistically, it's never going to go away. We're seeing things change. It's constantly morphing and moving around. I mean, even now, if you go online and Google, they have the Felony Lane Gang, and it's started in Southern Florida, and it's a group where a lot of women are targeted especially, but you're seeing they go to gyms, they go to hiking trails, paths like that. They'll break into a car, steal a purse. They know you're away from your car for an hour or so. Then they'll either have a field day with your credit cards and your identification right then and there, or what we're actually seeing is they'll kind of have a field day with your credit card, and then they'll leave, and they'll actually get people to put on wigs, and then they'll come back as much as a year later looking just like you, pull up to the window with maybe an old checkbook. And, you canceled everything. You thought everything was good. And then all of a sudden, a year later, you're like, welcome back. And it's somebody looking just like you. And I'm looking at the video. And, yeah, if you check it out, Felony Lane Gang, it's hit every state now. And it got its name from, they go to the banks and they hit the outside drive-through window, and
That's pretty dope.
And it's in a rental car. So you look, it's always a nice car. You're like, wow, it's a nice car. I'm always used to seeing kind of low grade, you give your credit card to the server. You wonder if they do a quick photograph, front and back, things like that. I see, but it's changing. And I see, obviously, when you have a theft ring, you're going to have more organization. Even with the skimmer rings, it's the same thing. They're coming out of, whether Eastern European, most of the skimmer rings. So you're picking up on things like that. The more organized they are, the little bit scarier they are, I would say for sure.
Dang it.
But I don't see them going away at all.
Yeah, from a business perspective, the dark web, there's this new term that got coined up last year, which is cybercrime as a service. So it used to be that you had to actually, when I started off in this back in my day, which I'm not that old, but back in my day, when I started off in hacking, you needed to know how to code. You know what I mean? You needed to know how to create malware. I was 12 years old coding viruses and coding malware and building that stuff. You don't have to know. So pretty much the ability to do that was limited to a pretty significant number of people, right? You're looking for someone who knows some stuff. Now you don't have that anymore. You don't need that anymore. You can literally go on the dark web, and there are organizations out there who you can buy a $29.99 DDoS. So if you piss me off and I want to shut down your website, I can literally go on the dark web, pay $29.99 because it's on sale. I give them your website name, I pay them, and then they handle it all for me.
Rude.
Sit back and watch. There's ransomware as a service. So I'd say companies, because they're businesses, they're organized crime businesses. You can go online, and some of them are actually free. So they say, you give us the target, we'll go do the ransom, and we split the difference. You take 30, I take 70, since I'm doing the hard work. You know what I mean? So it's become commoditized is what's happening. And anytime you have something that becomes commoditized, obviously you open the door for more people to come in. When you have a crime that becomes commoditized, I'm sure, Detective, you can speak on it, it becomes really difficult to deal with, because now, the potential suspect that you're looking for has just expanded. The demographics of that suspect has expanded exponentially, where it used to be, okay, we're looking for a guy who knows how to code, who maybe has a background in computer science. Now it could literally be a pissed off kid in a basement who just went on the dark web and bought it.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, like he's saying, we had a bunch of gangbangers out of California, and this talk about tech. These guys used to get arrested for robberies and things like that and do a bunch of years in prison, and now they found out about the dark web. They can log on, they can buy a bulk of credit cards, like 10, 50, 100 of them. They can get a computer, a skimmer device, re-encode some gift cards, have a field day, and half the time when they get caught, it's white collar, so bad. You know what I mean? Maybe do a year in jail, 2 years, then they're back out. And I've caught them before, the groups, and like you said, they're getting more organized, because now you got gang members teaching, hey, do this, you won't go to jail as long. It's not like getting caught with a gun where you're going to, or third strike or anything like that. So, it's not nonviolent crime. So we have seen the transition. It's scary. So.
Yeah, and legislation is still playing catch up.
And they need to move a little faster.
Yeah, well, because let's be honest, who's making the legislation? I mean, it's people who probably use a computer once a week, or their assistant does it, right? So, legislation is still trying to catch up but it's how you write the laws, right? I mean, for example, when I tell people about my background now, I tell them, don't do the things that I did when I started off. Because back when I was hacking, you hack a company, they hire you. Right now, you hack a company, you go to jail. You know what I mean? But legislation is still trying to catch up as to how to make laws around cybersecurity. So it's changing. It's evolving. It's changing, and it's only going to evolve more as technology becomes more and more intricate in our lives.
All right. Well, last question. So, what can people do to try to avoid being a victim of identity theft? Let's start with you, Kenyatta.
Okay, so very simply, of course you should do your due diligence and change your passwords and shred your documents, because that's cute and makes you feel good. However, I'm sure you've heard that none of that's really going to matter when it comes down to them getting your information and using it. So what I know and understand is that the most important thing you could do is to have a monitoring service to monitor all of your personal and private and financial information for you and your entire family. A company like LegalShield, plug, because we're going to monitor all of that information, including your social media. So what we basically do is monitor it to make sure if it shows up in all these bad places, or someone changes your address without you knowing about it, or someone goes and files a credit report, or tries to get insurance in your name, or put your address on a social media site, or a payday loan site, or a sex offender database, you'll get notified. And that early detection, I think, is the first step in trying to mitigate it becoming a disaster. So, handle the cough before it becomes pneumonia. But if it's not monitored, you're going to find out too late. And then if you do have an issue and you have a monitoring service like ours, then we use the private investigators to do whatever it takes, as long as it takes, to restore your identity for life. And like the officer mentioned, a year later, they're going to use it again, and they're going to use it again and again and again. And we will always fix it. We will always put it back like it never happened. So to me, that is what I do for my family, because I don't have time to be watching everything, and I can't. It doesn't matter anyway. You need to have something in place to monitor it, and then have a restoration plan for when it's going to happen, because it will. It will.
What about you, Detective?
I would probably just echo that. I mean, as you can do all this, they tell you what at the gas pumps, check. I mean, you could try to be as safe as you can, cover up PIN numbers, but at the end of the day, who knows how how quickly it's passing through different, and there's so many companies involved. I'm finding out, like, when you swipe your card at a restaurant, there's also a company that there's individual companies in between that do approvals and things like that. So you have no idea where the link in the chain is actually being attacked. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to confirm what the detective just talked about is what I talked about earlier. You have no idea where your data goes. People are getting to a point now where they say, well, I just went to a restaurant. Yeah, but your credit card went to 5 different companies just as part of that transaction. And one of them got breached. The restaurant didn't even get breached. One of them got breached. And so you've literally never heard of this restaurant, but they've got your credit card number, they got your address, they got your name. You've never done in direct business with them. What I tell people, and this is a little bit more forward, but I tell people the beautiful thing about the hard thing about capitalism is that things like Equifax happened where they made a money decision versus a right decision. The beautiful thing about capitalism, though, is that you can also flip the script, which is if enough people start asking, where is my data going? Then these companies are going to get forced to either start being more transparent or to start actually reacting. And I think we're nearing that. I think we're nearing the point where consumers are starting to become more aware and they should start asking that same question. Just like if somebody comes up to you on the street and says, hey, do you want to take a picture with me? You're probably going to go, well, where's it going? Right. So start asking, where is my data going? And by the way, ask it in plain English. Because one of the things that companies do is they'll put a lot of legal terms around things and it will shroud it to make it not understandable, just like Instagram did with that model. Ask it in plain English. Take that 5, 10 minute, 20 minute call and ask and say, hey, where does my information actually go and who's going to have it? And who gets held responsible if it gets breached, by the way? You may start realizing that people are a lot more than you think about their confidence in their own security.
That is a good point. All right. Well, any last thoughts on this fun topic? I think we've kind of covered everything.
I just want like a badge like this detective.
I know, it is so cool.
Like it's so cool, man. I want to walk around with a badge.
Well, thank you, Kenyatta, Dioly, and Detective Eckert for being here and giving us the legitimate perspective. And how can our listeners contact you? Kenyatta.
Are you looking at me? Oh, me. Yes, my name is Kenyatta Turner, and you can go to my website that LegalShield actually provides for me. It's kenyattaturner.wearelegalshield.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. You can definitely find me there.
LinkedIn Queen.
LinkedIn Queen. Hashtag LinkedIn is magical. And you can even call me. I don't even care. 602-367-1069.
That's my phone number. How this is going to end.
Whatever. You can find it easy.
And Detective, what is the phone number for the Goodyear Police Department?
Okay. He was like, I'm not going to give you the phone number. Non-emergency, 623-932-1220. But yeah, you can always ask. You can email me. I mean, I'll try to answer any questions. Obviously, I'm working for Goodyear, so I'll try to. If you're a Goodyear resident, it's gonna be a bigger thing, but I'll try to help anybody out.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can, for Blackshield, you can go right on our website, blackshieldcyber.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Dioly Alexandre. My name's a little bit weird. My first name is spelled Dioly. If you type that in, I should be the only one who comes up. So Dioly Alexandre on LinkedIn. You can shoot me an email. My first initial, D, Alexandre. Alexandre spelled ALEXANDRE at blackshieldcyber.com. Feel free to reach out with any questions. And business owners here in Phoenix, I'll do this just for Business RadioX. If you shoot me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn and you mention Business RadioX, I'll have either myself or one of my cyber warfare lead guys reach out to you and answer any questions you have.
Ooh, that's gold right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for you.
Well, thanks again, Phoenix Business Radio X, Kenyatta Turner, Dioly Alexandre, and Detective Eckert, and to you listening. And also thank you to our sponsor, AZ Credit Law Group, providing legal services to help improve credit. You can visit us online at azclg.com. And join us next time on November 7th at 3 p.m. for Credit Reporting, Episode 3, Credit Repair. And I'm Rochelle Poulton, legitimately yours.